The night opens with a slow crawl of wind through an endless canopy. Pine branches sway like dark waves against a pale, fractured moon. The forest hums, alive and ancient, every creak of bark and whisper of leaves blending into a quiet song older than memory. A faint fog drifts across the forest floor, clinging to roots and stones, turning the world silver. Somewhere in the distance, a single owl calls out, low, patient, warning of something unseen. The voice of the narrator enters softly, almost a whisper, like someone telling a secret they wish they hadn't remembered. They speak of how forests have always held stories. Not the kind written in books, but the kind buried in soil, carved into bark, whispered between branches when no one is around to listen. The sound of their voice carries both reverence and fear, a recognition that some places are not meant to be understood, only respected. The camera glides slowly through the trees, showing small, human traces scattered among the wilderness. An abandoned shoe half buried in mud, a torn tent flap fluttering like a wound, a photograph pinned to a fallen log by a rusted knife. The images flicker past like fragments of forgotten lives. The air thickens, the mist curling tighter around the base of the trees as though hiding something deeper within. The narrator continues, saying that the forest doesn't forget what it's been shown. Every scream, every prayer, every tear that's fallen on its soil is absorbed, remembered, and repeated in the rustling of the leaves. People say the woods are quiet, but that's only if you don't listen closely enough. If you stop long enough, the silence begins to breathe. It shifts. It watches. It waits. The atmosphere builds with a low, rhythmic hum beneath the narration, the faint pulse of an unseen heartbeat. Fireflies flicker in the fog like dying stars. The tone feels intimate and heavy, as though the listener is being pulled closer, invited to step into something they shouldn't. The voice warns that every story about the forest begins the same way, with curiosity. A camper who wanders off the path, a hiker who ignores the signs, a traveler who thinks the woods are just trees. The music deepens, a soft drone layered with faint whispers, too quiet to understand but too human to ignore. The visuals now show shadowed trails, twisted roots, and faint footprints that vanish halfway through the frame. The sense of time blurs. Night and dawn seem to merge, the horizon bleeding gray and blue. The narrator's tone shifts slightly, from calm reflection to something more personal. They confess that the stories about to be told were all sent in by real people. Every account is true, every sound recorded, every voice verified. The stories come from park rangers, from missing person investigators, from those who went into the woods and came back changed, and from some who never came back at all. The forest, the narrator says, collects these moments like trophies, weaving them into its roots so that anyone who steps inside can feel them. The air becomes heavier. The sound of wind transforms into a slow exhale. The narrator pauses, almost as if they've begun to hear it too, the faint movement just beyond the microphone. Leaves shifting, a branch breaking, something walking parallel to their words. They lower their voice to a near whisper. If you ever find yourself alone in the woods, they say, and you hear footsteps that stop when you stop, don't call out, because something might already know your name. A single beat of silence follows, then a soft, distant echo of laughter, distorted as though played from an old tape recorder. The imagery fades to black, and the last line drops like a weight into the stillness. The forest doesn't forget what's buried within it. There's a moment where the silence feels too long, the kind that presses against your ears until it starts to sound like a heartbeat again. Then, a sudden rustle, a footstep in the dark, the faint sound of someone breathing, running, leaves crunching underfoot. The tone shifts from reflection to motion, panic rising. The sound grows louder, faster, closer. The narrator's voice returns, steady but cold. The stories you're about to hear aren't about monsters, they say. They're about people, and the places that swallowed them whole. The final line is delivered with a tone that feels half invitation, half warning. So if you're still here, turn off the lights, take a breath, and listen carefully, because the forest remembers everything. The footsteps stop abruptly, a final breath, a long stretch of silence. Then the faintest echo of leaves parting as if something unseen just stepped aside. The transition hum begins. A deep rumble like wind passing through hollow trees, and the sound fades seamlessly into the next story, where the footsteps continue, but now belonging to someone else. The night sky over the Oregon wilderness was clear when they first arrived. 3 friends from college, tired of the city and hungry for silence. Evan, the loud one, the kind of guy who could make a joke out of fear. Tyler, the cautious observer who'd packed 3 flashlights and a satellite phone. And Mia, quiet, drawn to the stillness of the forest like it spoke a language she used to know. Their laughter carried through the tall pines as they set up camp, beer cans clinking, a small fire cracking in the dark. The forest was a cathedral of sound: crickets, the gentle hiss of wind, the rhythmic sigh of distant branches. Everything felt pure, empty, safe. By midnight, the fire had burned low. The stars above were too many to count. Evan wandered a little too far from the circle of light, his flashlight swinging lazily in his hand. Tyler called after him, half joking, "Don't get lost, man. The forest doesn't care about your GPA." Evan laughed, disappearing between the trees. They didn't think much of it. Not at first. 10 minutes passed, then 20. When they called again, there was no answer. Only the soft rustle of leaves, the kind that makes you think someone's walking just out of sight. Mia's voice trembled as she said she'd heard something. Whispering, faint, too human to be the wind. Tyler turned off the music they'd been playing and listened. For a moment, everything stopped. Then, deep in the woods, came the sound of laughter. Evan's laughter. Except, it didn't sound right. It was stretched somehow, drawn out like a recording played just a bit too slow. They grabbed their flashlights and went looking. The forest had changed. What had been familiar now felt infinite. Every tree looked the same. The dirt trail had vanished beneath fog that rolled low over the ground, thick as smoke. They called Evan's name again and again, voices cracking, but only the echo came back, distorted, uneven, as if something was calling back to them, mimicking them. They reached the clearing where Evan's tent was. The zipper was drawn shut from the inside. His shoes were by the entrance, his flashlight sitting neatly beside them, still on. The beam illuminated the fabric of the tent from within, making it glow faintly. Tyler hesitated before unzipping it. Inside, there was no one. The sleeping bag was flattened, cold. No sign of struggle, no footprints leaving the tent. Just the faint smell of damp soil, like the earth itself had exhaled. Mia started crying quietly, whispering that they needed to leave. Tyler agreed, but when he turned, he froze. In the distance, maybe 30 feet away, stood a figure. It looked like Evan. His outline, his jacket, his height. But he was still, perfectly still. Tyler called his name. No response. When Mia shined her light toward him, his face was wrong. Blurred somehow, like static over a picture. The light flickered, and when it steadied again, he was gone. Panic set in. They grabbed their gear and ran, crashing through the brush, branches clawing at their clothes, the darkness pressing in. Behind them, they heard footsteps following. Fast, heavy, close. But every time they stopped, so did the sound. The forest felt alive now, watching, waiting. The air was thick, cold, metallic. They stumbled out onto the dirt road leading back to their car. Mia turned back one last time and saw light. Just one flashlight beam, swaying between the trees, as if someone were still searching. When the police arrived the next morning, they found nothing. No sign of Evan. His tent stood exactly where they'd left it, zipped up, untouched. No footprints except theirs. The ranger said people disappear all the time in these woods. The way he said it sounded rehearsed, like he'd said it too many times before. A week later, Mia got a voicemail. Unknown number. When she played it, the line was filled with static, then faint breathing. A man's voice whispered, "It's cold here," followed by a sound like twigs snapping underfoot. She froze. It was Evan's voice. The voicemail ended abruptly, replaced by silence so deep it seemed to absorb every sound in the room. Tyler called her that night. He'd gotten one, two, same number, same message, same breath. They compared recordings. Both had something faint at the end, almost imperceptible. A second voice whispering, overlapping Evans. It was lower, rougher, and it said the same thing in perfect sync, like an echo from beneath the earth. That night, neither of them slept. Tyler swore he saw movement in his backyard. A shadow slipping behind the trees. Mia stayed by her window until dawn, watching the woods near her apartment complex. In the gray light of morning, she noticed something carved into the bark of the nearest tree. 3 letters E, V, A. The wood around it was fresh, as if cut only hours ago. The story closes on a slow fade of forest ambience. The wind rising again, gentle but untrustworthy. The narrator's voice returns, steady, low, mournful. Some people don't go missing, they say. They just join the woods. The sound of footsteps starts again in the background. One set, steady, moving deeper into the forest, and then fades into silence. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the forest still dripped and sighed as if it hadn't noticed. Mara adjusted the strap of her ranger pack and flicked her flashlight toward the trail ahead. She was on her 4th night alone in Yellowstone's northern sector. A section so remote it didn't even have a proper name, just a grid code on the park map. The radio on her shoulder crackled with intermittent static, the kind that made her feel less alone but more aware of how far she was from anyone else. Her job tonight was simple. Check the perimeter after several hikers had filed complaints about a man watching them from the trees. At first, Mara had laughed it off. People see shadows, they panic. The forest does that, plays tricks with depth and sound. But after the 3rd report, each describing a tall figure standing motionless at dusk, too far away to make out a face, she felt something twist in her stomach. She'd been a ranger for nearly 10 years. She'd seen the aftermath of animal attacks, missing hikers, even stumbled on unmarked graves from a century ago. But she'd never felt the woods watching her back. As she walked, her boots sank slightly into the damp soil. The forest around her breathed, an orchestra of quiet sounds, each one layered over the next. The occasional drip from the canopy, the squeak of her pack's buckle, the distant hoot of an owl. The silence between those sounds felt heavier than the noise itself. She came upon a clearing where the trail curved toward the ridge. Something glittered faintly in the beam of her flashlight. At first, she thought it was glass, but as she knelt, she saw it was a small Polaroid photo half buried in mud. The edges were soft from rain. When she wiped it off, her heart froze. The photo showed a tent, one of the ranger-issued ones, illuminated by flashlight. Through the fabric, she could see the shadow of a woman inside. The photo wasn't old. It looked like it had been taken the night before. Her breath quickened. She turned in a slow circle, shining her light in every direction. The trees stared back, still and endless. She radioed in. "Base, this is Ranger Mara. Checking grid 8 Delta. Found something unusual. Might need another set of eyes." Static answered. No voice, just a faint pop, then silence. She pocketed the photo and moved on. The deeper she went, the more she noticed strange signs. Small piles of stones arranged deliberately, each topped with another photo. Some showed tents, some fires, some people she didn't recognize. All of them seemed recent. The forest pressed tighter around her. The path began to narrow until it became more instinct than trail. Then she saw it. A small structure nestled between 2 massive pines, built from mismatched wood panels and camouflage netting. It looked like a hunter's blind, maybe even an observation hut. She stepped closer, heart hammering. The closer she got, the more she realized it wasn't abandoned. The dirt around the entrance was freshly disturbed. Mara lifted the latch slowly. The door creaked open, and the smell hit her first: mildew, sweat, and the faint sweetness of old film chemicals. Her flashlight swept across the walls. Every inch was covered in Polaroid photographs. Hundreds of them, some taped neatly, others layered on top of one another. All showed people, campers, hikers, families smiling beside campfires. Many were asleep. Her light caught one near the far wall. It was her, standing by her truck, taken earlier that week. She hadn't noticed anyone then. Her hands trembled as she looked closer. Behind her in the photo, half hidden in shadow, was a tall, indistinct shape between the trees. The angle was wrong. No one could have taken it without being right behind her. Her breathing grew shallow. She reached for her radio again, but this time the static was louder, distorted. A faint clicking sound came through the speaker, rhythmic and deliberate, like a camera shutter. Click, click, click. The flashlight flickered. She froze. Then she heard it again. Not from the radio this time. From outside. She turned off her light, holding her breath. Through a gap in the wall, she could see the outline of the forest beyond the blind. The fog had returned, swirling between the trees like smoke. A figure stood just beyond the edge of the clearing. Tall, unmoving. The same silhouette she'd seen in the photo. His head tilted slightly, almost curious. Mara slowly backed away, the floor creaking under her boots. The clicking grew louder, faster, like a burst of camera flashes in total darkness. She turned, sprinted out of the blind, branches clawing at her face as she ran. The forest was no longer silent. It was alive with the crack of twigs and her own frantic breathing. When she finally reached her truck, her hands shook so violently she could barely fit the key into the ignition. The headlights cut through the fog, illuminating the path ahead. In that beam stood something, a shape, human, motionless. She hit the gas, heart pounding. The figure didn't move, but as she drove past, she saw its hand slowly lift something shiny. The flash of a camera. She didn't stop until she reached the main ranger station. The night staff found her pale, shaking, unable to form words. When they checked her cabin later that night, they found nothing unusual, except a Polaroid photo taped to her front door. It showed her standing inside her cabin window, the blinds half drawn. The timestamp at the bottom read 2:17 a.m. 30 minutes before she had arrived home. For weeks after, she couldn't sleep without every light on. She nailed her curtains shut, moved her bed away from the window. But sometimes, just before dawn, she swore she could hear the faint click of a camera somewhere outside, in the darkness beyond the glass. The Appalachian air was damp that morning, thick with the smell of rain-soaked soil and moss. Dr. Lena Hartman adjusted her glasses and crouched near a patch of green spreading across a fallen log. She was a botanist, contracted by a small university to study fungal symbiosis in isolated forest systems. The world she knew was scientific, clean, measurable. But there, deep among the Appalachian ridges, the forest hummed with something that didn't fit into data or research notes. She told herself it was the isolation, the quiet, the way her thoughts grew louder the longer she stayed alone. She'd been camping near the ridge for 3 weeks. Her tent was surrounded by samples in labeled jars, equipment, and notebooks filled with neat handwriting. Each day, she ventured farther into the forest, collecting mosses, photographing growth patterns. But it wasn't the visual beauty that fascinated her. It was the sound. Whenever she got close enough to certain clusters of moss, there was a faint vibration, like static. At first, she thought it was her recorder malfunctioning. Then, one afternoon, she pressed her ear closer. It wasn't static. It was whispering. She froze, breath catching in her throat. The voice was soft, almost fragile. She couldn't make out words, but it carried tone. Sad, tired, calling. She quickly pulled back, convincing herself it was wind funneled through roots or the hum of insects. But later, as she lay in her tent that night, she heard it again. Faint, rhythmic, right beneath her. A woman's voice. Familiar. It was saying her name. The next morning, Lena packed her recorder and microphone, determined to document it. Science demanded evidence. She followed the sound to a slope covered in thick, emerald moss. When she placed the microphone near the ground, the whispers grew louder, layered, hundreds of voices overlapping, indistinct but emotional. Then, amid the murmurs, she heard one voice clear as glass. Lena! She stumbled back, her pulse racing. The voice was her mother's, but her mother had been dead for 2 years. The recording continued even when she unplugged the mic. She knelt again, whispering shakily, Is someone there? The response came instantly, too fast. Here. The moss rippled slightly, as if breathing. She reached out, fingertips trembling, and brushed it. It was warm, too warm. Beneath the soft texture, she felt something hard, like bone. She dug a little, peeling away layers of damp green. The soil beneath was threaded with roots, small stones, and something white. She brushed more away and saw it clearly. A tooth, then another, then a small ring tangled in fibrous tendrils. Her mind tried to rationalize it must have been an old burial site, erosion, coincidence. But the whispers only grew clearer, more frantic, overlapping, calling her name again and again. That night, she played the recording back inside her tent. The whispers had changed. They weren't random anymore. They were forming words, phrases, sentences. Stay with us, they said. We remember you. Her mother's voice came last, low and trembling. Don't leave me alone here. Lena wept silently. She missed her mother, the one person who believed in her work, who used to read her fairy tales about forests that could speak. Maybe this was her mind breaking under isolation. Maybe it was grief finding a new shape. But the next morning, when she stepped outside, she found something that froze her where she stood. Near the moss bed, someone had arranged her collection jars in a perfect circle. The lids were unscrewed. Inside, the samples had grown overnight, sprouting small, delicate threads that spelled out a single word in pale yellow spores. Stay. Her journal entries from that day grew erratic. The handwriting tilted, sentences trailed off mid-thought. She wrote about how the moss was expanding, creeping closer to her tent. How it moved slightly when the wind stopped. She wrote that she could smell her mother's perfume in the damp air, faint but distinct, jasmine and cedarwood. That evening, she set up her camera to record overnight. At 3:12 a.m., she woke to her own voice speaking outside her tent. She unzipped it slowly. There was no one there, but the moss shimmered faintly under the moonlight, damp and alive. The air around it pulsed in slow waves. Her recorder clicked on by itself, whispering her name again and again until she screamed for it to stop. The next morning, the camera was gone. Only the tripod remained, its legs wrapped in green threads. Her notebooks were damp. The ink bled into unreadable shapes. She packed what she could and started hiking back toward the main trail. But the forest felt different now. She couldn't find her markers. Every path she took curved back to the same slope. The same patch of moss. It was larger now, covering more of the ground. In the center was something new. A small mound of dirt freshly disturbed. Her mother's ring sat atop it. Lena collapsed to her knees, sobbing, clutching the ring to her chest. The whispers rose like wind, surrounding her. She pressed her hands over her ears, but the sound was inside her now, vibrating through her bones. With us, the voices said. She's under here with us. The forest swallowed her screams. Weeks later, a rescue team found her camp. The tent was collapsed, her supplies scattered. Her journal was recovered, but the last page was almost unreadable, covered in smears of mud and faint writing carved into the paper itself. She's under here with them. The moss had grown over most of the site, thick and lush, as if it had been feeding. One of the rescuers brushed some away to mark the area, and froze. Beneath it, he saw what looked like the imprint of a hand pressed into the soil, fingers reaching upward. When he blinked, it was gone. The Alaskan woods were a kingdom of silence, endless white stretching beneath a bruised sky. Nathan Cole had been hunting there for over 20 years. He knew the language of snow, the crunch that meant fresh powder, the dull press that meant thaw beneath. The trees, black against the silver world, were familiar companions. But that night, as he trudged through the snow under a moon swollen and ghostly, he saw something he couldn't name. It began as a flicker between the pines. A faint, bluish glow, no brighter than the flame of a lighter. He stopped, breath misting in the cold air, squinting through his scope. It wasn't a reflection. It wasn't fire. The light moved with intention, weaving through the trees as if it knew he was watching. He told himself it was a trick of his tired eyes, a distortion caused by the cold. Still, something about it drew him forward. The forest had a way of swallowing sound. Even his boots, crunching through the snow, felt muffled. The air grew colder, sharper, pressing into his lungs like glass. The blue light pulsed once, twice, then began to drift away. He followed it. He didn't know why, only that the light filled him with a strange warmth, a curiosity that felt almost holy. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Time became slippery. The deeper he went, the more distorted the world became. Snowflakes hung in the air longer than they should. His own breath seemed to slow, stretching into long, syrupy ribbons of vapor. The light ahead danced just out of reach, inviting, patient. He whispered into the stillness, "Who's there?" No answer, just that low, glowing shimmer. He finally reached a clearing. The snow was untouched, no footprints but his. The light hovered above the ground, swirling in small spirals, as if studying him. Nathan raised his hand slowly, fingers trembling from cold and awe. The light responded. It floated closer until it hovered inches from his palm. The blue glow illuminated his face, revealing tears frozen to his cheeks. In its reflection, he saw himself as a child, standing beside his father's old cabin, laughing in the snow. For a moment he forgot everything else. Then the light dimmed, and the warmth faded. Something changed in its rhythm. It pulsed once more, brighter now, almost blinding, and in that instant he saw shapes around him in the snow. Shadows, dozens of them, figures standing motionless at the edge of the clearing, their outlines faint, blurred by the mist. His breath caught. The blue light pulsed again, and the shadows took a step closer. He stumbled back, heart pounding, rifle clutched tight. "Who's out there?" he shouted. But the sound was swallowed instantly. The light darted upward, circling above him. The air crackled. Static filled his ears, drowning out thought. And then, through the haze, he saw it, his own reflection standing among the trees. It was him. Same face, same coat, same rifle. But the reflection didn't move like he did. It stood perfectly still, eyes glowing faintly blue. The shock rooted him in place. He blinked, but it remained. The duplicate tilted its head slightly, mirroring him but delayed, like a lag in a live broadcast. When he took a step forward, it didn't follow. Instead, its mouth opened slowly, impossibly wide. A thin blue light spilled out, spiraling upward into the cold air. The real Nathan fell to his knees, disoriented. The light above him expanded, forming tendrils that reached toward the sky, illuminating the forest in a sickly, otherworldly glow. He wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at him to flee, but his body refused to move. The air was thick, buzzing, heavy with energy. The ground beneath his hands began to hum. The snow wasn't cold anymore. It was warm, almost alive. He could feel it shifting beneath his palms, like something breathing underneath. Then, just as suddenly as it began, everything went still. The blue light vanished. The forest returned to silence, the kind that presses into your ears until you can hear your heartbeat. Nathan stood slowly, chest heaving. The clearing was empty. His rifle lay on the ground, half buried in snow. He turned to leave but stopped. There, half buried in the snow ahead, was something frozen solid. A body. He stepped closer, flashlight trembling in his shaking hand. The figure was dressed exactly like him. Same coat, same boots, same rifle at its side. Frost had crept over the face, obscuring the features, but even through the veil of ice, he recognized his own eyes staring back. They glowed faintly blue. Nathan stumbled backward, tripping over his pack. His breath came in ragged bursts, the sound too loud in the still air. He looked up, expecting to see the light again, but there was only darkness. His flashlight flickered once and died. The forest swallowed him whole. Hours later, search teams found his truck parked by the trailhead, keys still in the ignition. His tracks led deep into the forest but ended abruptly in the middle of a clearing. At the center, there was a circle of melted snow, perfectly round, the ground beneath scorched. The rescue team found no signs of fire. Months passed, and the case was closed as another missing in the wild. But one winter morning, a trapper reported finding something strange near the same clearing. A human figure, perfectly preserved in the ice, standing upright beneath a thin layer of frost. The man's face was calm, peaceful even, his eyes glowing faintly blue in the dawn light. Later, when authorities went to retrieve the body, it was gone. Only a small patch of melted snow remained, and the faint smell of ozone in the air, as if lightning had struck somewhere close. The story ends with a slow pull through the trees, the camera catching glimpses of reflected light on ice. A faint glow moves between trunks, hovering, searching. Nathan's voice returns softly, distant and fractured. I followed the light, but it wasn't meant for the living. The last thing heard is the echo of footsteps crunching through snow, fading into the endless white. The forest in Oregon had a strange beauty to it, a kind of alive stillness that felt older than time itself. When Maya and her boyfriend Luke drove there for a weekend camping trip, they wanted escape, quiet, maybe a little healing. They were young but already carrying too much weight. Maya's panic attacks had been getting worse since her brother disappeared 3 years ago while hiking in a nearby area. This trip was supposed to help her find peace, closure. By the time they reached the trailhead, dusk had already begun to fall, bleeding gold into the moss-covered woods. The air smelled of rain and pine sap. Mist drifted low across the ground, swallowing the path ahead in a soft, ghostly haze. They set up their tent near a stream, laughter muffled beneath the canopy of redwoods. Luke teased her about her spooky forest obsession, and she smiled, though her eyes kept flicking toward the tree line. That night, the forest seemed to breathe around them. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the fog, and the sound of the stream blended with the distant hum of crickets. But beneath it all, Maya thought she could hear something else. A faint, rhythmic sound, like footsteps pacing in the dark. Luke said it was an animal. She nodded, pretending to believe him. Sometime after midnight, she woke suddenly. The fire had gone out, and the forest was pitch black. The air inside the tent felt too thin, too heavy with moisture. Luke was asleep beside her, face turned away. She heard the noise again. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. It circled the tent slowly, deliberate and measured. She sat frozen, every muscle tensed, trying not to breathe too loudly. The sound stopped just outside. Then something brushed against the fabric. A drag of fingers or maybe claws. Her whisper barely broke the silence. Luke. No response. Luke. She reached for him and froze. His skin was ice cold. She turned him toward her, heart racing. His face was pale, expression blank, eyes half open but unfocused. She shook him harder, panic blooming in her chest. Luke! His lips parted as if to speak, but only a shallow exhale escaped. A whisper of air, carrying a faint sound that didn't belong to him. It was a voice, not his. She scrambled backward, hand catching on the zipper of the tent, trying to open it, but the zipper wouldn't move. It was jammed. Outside, the sound of footsteps began again. Faster now, circling. Then they stopped. A shadow fell across the thin wall of the tent, taller than any person. Its outline seemed to bend unnaturally, head tilting in sharp, insect-like motions. The whisper came again, clearer this time. You shouldn't have come back. Her blood ran cold. The voice was her brother's. She clawed at the zipper until it tore. The cold hit her like a slap. The forest was drowned in thick fog, the trees distant silhouettes. The air smelled faintly of wet earth and something else. Something metallic like old blood. She turned, expecting to see Luke stumble out after her. But the tent behind her was gone. Just gone. Only the flat, frost-covered ground remained. She spun around in confusion, heart pounding so hard it hurt. A figure stood in the mist ahead, thin, still, impossible to make out. No, she whispered. That can't be. The figure stepped closer, and she saw the outline of her brother. Same jacket, same torn jeans he'd been wearing the day he vanished. His head hung low, and his skin looked as pale as bone beneath the fog. "Eli," she said, her voice breaking. He stopped, and when he finally looked up, her breath caught. His eyes were black, not in a demonic way, but hollow, like someone had carved them out. Water streamed down his face as though he had been crying for years. "You shouldn't be here," he said again, voice cracked, distant. Tears blurred her vision. "I came for you. I thought maybe—" The forest shifted then, subtle at first. The mist around them began to move, twisting into long, ghostly ribbons. The sound of the stream was gone. The air grew thick and humming, and for the first time, she realized she couldn't hear any insects, any wind. Just a low, vibrating hum that seemed to come from the trees themselves. Eli's shape flickered, like a dying flame. "They don't let go," he whispered. "They keep us here." She stumbled backward, shaking her head. "No, no, you're not real." He reached out, hand trembling. "Go, before it sees you." She turned, ready to run. But then she saw it, a figure emerging from the fog behind her brother. It was huge, almost formless, its body blending into the trees. Its limbs seemed made of bark and mist, stretching far too long, ending in points that dragged across the ground. The sound of wood creaking filled the air as it moved. Eli turned toward it, as if shielding her. "Run!" he screamed, and the creature lunged. She bolted into the trees, branches whipping her face, lungs burning with every breath. Behind her, the forest exploded with noise. Cracks, groans, whispers that weren't words but something deeper, older. The ground beneath her feet pulsed, soft and alive, as if the roots themselves were moving. She didn't stop, couldn't. After what felt like hours, she stumbled into a clearing. The fog broke for a moment, revealing a small wooden cabin. Old, abandoned, windows dark. She collapsed against the door, gasping. It gave way easily, swinging open to reveal a small, dust-covered room. She slammed it shut behind her, sinking to the floor. Her heart hammered in her chest. The room was filled with the scent of mold and decay. A single lantern hung from the ceiling, flickering dimly. And on the far wall, she saw something that froze her blood, dozens of photographs, tacked up in uneven rows. Faces, people, all of them pale, hollow-eyed, all of them standing somewhere in that same forest. She recognized one immediately, her brother. In the newest photo, taken with the same angle and framing as the others, he stood with his head tilted slightly toward the camera. Behind him, half hidden in the mist, was a shadow, the same shape she had seen in the trees. Her hands shook as she reached for the picture, realizing her own photo was pinned just below it. Her face, her clothes, her expression mid-scream. The lantern flickered again. The air grew colder. A whisper rose from behind her, soft, wet, like leaves dragging over the floor. "You came back." She turned, slowly, the lantern trembling in her hand. The doorway was empty, but she could see shapes moving just beyond the thin wooden walls. Shadows that didn't match the light. The whisper grew louder, surrounding her, echoing her own breathing. Then, one voice cut through them all, familiar, broken, close enough to feel against her ear. "Maya, don't look." She turned anyway. Outside the window, pressed against the glass, was her brother's face. Pale, hollow, eyes black as the forest night. His lips moved soundlessly, then froze, as something behind him, something massive, rose from the fog, wrapping its limbs around him like roots reclaiming the dead. The light went out. By morning, the cabin was empty. When rangers found it days later, they discovered 2 sleeping bags inside, one torn open, and dozens of photographs scattered across the floor. Every one of them showing a different part of the forest, the fog, and faintly, a shape hidden within the trees. In the final photo, a woman's silhouette stood in the mist, eyes wide, as something tall and eyeless reached toward her. The Appalachian forest had a kind of darkness that didn't depend on the absence of light. It came from the ground itself, from the roots and rocks and the stories buried beneath them. The locals called it the Hollow Silence. It was a place people avoided after sunset, not because of bears or wolves, but because of the voices that supposedly rose when the mist touched the treetops. Aaron didn't believe in any of that. He was 26, a geologist, rational to a fault and recently heartbroken. He'd taken the research trip to distract himself, to bury his emotions in data, soil, and silence. He hiked alone for 3 days, setting up camp near an old mining trail deep in the forest. The air smelled of iron and wet moss, and the trees stood so densely packed that even during the day, sunlight reached the ground in trembling, broken ribbons. On his second night, the wind shifted. The forest went still, not silent, but expectant. Even the bugs stopped humming. He noticed it while writing notes near the fire. The air felt thicker, charged. He thought it was a storm coming in, though the sky had been perfectly clear at dusk. Then he heard it. A sound faint and low, like a woman humming a lullaby somewhere deep among the trees. He froze, pen hovering above the page. The melody was delicate, almost sorrowful. It drifted through the forest, echoing softly, as if carried by water. He stood and called out, "Hello!" No answer. The sound continued, weaving between the trees. He turned on his flashlight, sweeping it through the dark, but the mist made it useless. The beam hit only fog and bark. Still, he felt a pull, an inexplicable curiosity to find the source. He left the fire burning and followed the voice. Each step took him deeper into the woods, where the air grew colder and the earth softer beneath his boots. The humming grew clearer, more human. He began to make out words, though not in English. Sounded old, older than the land itself. A whispering chant. The flashlight flickered once, twice, then steadied. He came upon a clearing. At the center was a shallow pond, still as glass, reflecting the moon like a perfect mirror. The sound stopped. Aaron's breath fogged in the air, rising in thin wisps. He stood at the water's edge, scanning the surface for movement. Nothing. Only his own reflection staring back. Then something broke the surface, a single ripple. He stepped closer, kneeling, curiosity overtaking caution. The reflection shifted. His face distorted, stretched, eyes blackening in the mirrored water. He blinked, and it was gone. He laughed under his breath, nervous but dismissive. "You're losing it," he muttered. He stood and turned to head back, then froze. There was someone standing at the far side of the clearing. A woman. Her dress was old, soaked to the knees, clinging to her thin frame. Her hair hung like wet moss over her face. She didn't move, didn't breathe. Aaron raised the flashlight, but the beam seemed to bend around her. "Hey, are you lost?" he called out. No answer. Just that same faint hum, now rising from everywhere at once. The woman tilted her head slowly, unnaturally. Then she took a step forward. Her feet didn't break the water's surface. She was walking on the pond, gliding toward him in utter silence. Aaron stumbled backward, tripping over a root, his flashlight tumbling into the mud. Panic flared. He scrambled to his feet, but when he looked up again, she was gone. Only the pond remained, smooth as glass once more. He ran back to camp. The fire was almost out, embers glowing faintly. He sat near it, shaking, telling himself he'd imagined everything. The rational part of him, the scientist, searched for explanations. Sound distortion, fog refraction, visual fatigue. That was all. But even as he repeated those words, he couldn't stop glancing toward the trees. He didn't sleep that night. Every few minutes, he thought he saw something move between the trunks. A flicker of white, a shadow bending where it shouldn't. The next morning, he found footprints near his camp. Bare feet, small, delicate, leading from the woods right up to his tent before disappearing into the soil. By afternoon, he packed up. The forest didn't feel right anymore. The deeper he tried to hike out, the more disoriented he became. The trail markers were gone, and his GPS refused to connect. It was as though the forest itself had shifted overnight. As evening fell again, he found himself back near the pond. His stomach dropped when he recognized it. He hadn't been walking in circles. Something had moved the path. The sun dipped behind the ridge, and with it came the cold. Mist rolled low across the clearing. The pond glowed faintly in the moonlight, and from its surface came that same low hum, growing louder, layered now, more voices joining in harmony. The water rippled. Aaron stepped back, terrified but transfixed. Then the voices stopped, all at once, leaving behind an unbearable silence. A hand broke through the water, pale, thin, grasping. Another followed, then another. Dozens of hands, emerging from beneath the surface, pulling themselves upward. Faces followed, pale, eyeless, mouths open in silent screams. Their skin shimmered faintly like wet stone. They crawled over one another, dragging themselves onto the shore, moving without sound, their limbs twisting unnaturally. Aaron turned and ran. Branches tore at his arms, roots snagged his boots. Behind him, the soft sound of wet footsteps followed, slow, synchronized, unrelenting. He didn't look back. He couldn't. He just ran until his lungs burned and his vision blurred. He stumbled upon an old shack, half collapsed and covered in ivy. Desperation drove him inside. It smelled of rot and damp earth. In the faint moonlight through the broken boards, he saw carvings etched into the wooden walls, spirals, symbols, and rows of names. The last one, freshly carved, was his. The realization hit like a hammer. His hands shook as he touched the carved letters, his own handwriting. He backed away, heart pounding in his throat. From the darkness beyond the doorway came the hum again, slow and rising. He turned toward the sound and saw the woman standing there. Her hair dripped black water onto the floorboards. Her face was hidden, but when she finally lifted her head, her eyes were empty sockets. She stepped forward, whispering words he couldn't understand. The temperature dropped so fast his breath crystallized in front of him. The walls trembled. The carvings began to glow faintly, one by one, until every name shone pale blue. Then the hum stopped, and the silence that followed was deafening. Aaron backed against the far wall, every instinct screaming at him to run, but his body refused to move. The woman's mouth opened slowly, impossibly wide, and from it came a sound so low it felt like it was coming from the ground itself. A sound that wasn't meant for human ears. His flashlight burst, plunging everything into black. The next morning, rangers found his abandoned tent, equipment scattered, but no sign of him. The only thing left at the site was his field journal, soaked through and half buried in mud. The final entry was smeared, barely legible, but the words could still be made out. The pond isn't water. It reflects what it takes. Don't listen to the singing. Weeks later, a hiker passing through the same clearing found a new carving in the shack wall. Aaron's name, freshly cut, glowing faintly under the moonlight. The hum returned that night, rolling softly through the trees, like the forest remembering another voice it had taken for its own. The forest fire had burned out months ago, but the earth still remembered the heat. The trees stood like blackened skeletons, charred limbs twisting upward toward a cold gray sky. When volunteers were finally allowed to return to survey the damage, most of them couldn't stay long. The silence was too heavy, the air too still. But for Clara Reeves, that silence was what she came for. She wasn't there to help rebuild. She wasn't even there on official duty. She came because of her brother, Daniel. He'd been part of the initial firefighting crew that vanished during the last night of the blaze. The report said they were caught in a flashover event, but no remains had ever been recovered. Only melted helmets and scorched radios, found near the center of the burn zone. Clara never believed the story. Something about the whole thing felt wrong. The coordinates didn't line up, the temperatures didn't match the conditions reported that night, and every survivor she spoke to avoided her eyes when she asked questions. So she came alone, camera strapped to her chest, recorder in her pocket, determined to document what was left. The ground crunched beneath her boots, ash mixed with brittle leaves. Every step sent up faint gray plumes that drifted like ghosts. The world around her was colorless, lifeless, except for the faint scent of burnt resin still clinging to the air. The deeper she went, the more the forest began to change. The trees were burned, yes, but not entirely destroyed. Some of them stood unnaturally straight, their trunks smooth and unbroken, like they'd been polished instead of scorched. The smell was strange, too sweet, almost metallic. She brushed her hand against one of the trunks and felt heat. Not warmth, actual heat, as though the fire were still burning inside the wood. She pulled her hand away and stared at the faint glow seeping from a crack in the bark. A soft orange light, pulsing rhythmically, like a heartbeat. Clara froze. Every rational thought in her mind told her it was impossible. Residual heat can't last months, especially not in this kind of damp air. She knelt, bringing her camera closer, and pressed record. The lens picked up the faint shimmer of light dancing beneath the bark. Then something moved. The glow shifted, crawling upward like a vein lighting from within. She stumbled back, heart hammering. It climbed the trunk, reached the branches, then disappeared into the canopy. Seconds later, the wind stirred for the first time that day, carried a low sound, something between a sigh and a whisper. She turned in a slow circle, scanning the treeline. The air shimmered faintly in several places now, like pockets of heat rising from asphalt. Shapes began to emerge from the haze, tall, thin silhouettes that seemed to stand just beyond the edge of visibility. Clara steadied her breathing. "Daniel?" she whispered before she could stop herself. The whisper stopped. For a moment, everything went completely still. Then a faint crackling came from the nearest tree, like fire starting again, small and contained. A soft orange light spread from the base upward. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the clearing was surrounded by dozens of glowing trunks, each pulsing in time with her heartbeat. Her camera's screen flickered, glitching with static. Through the distortion, she thought she saw something. Faces forming within the light. Human faces, their features distorted, mouths open in silent screams, eyes hollow. She gasped and stepped back, tripping over a half-buried hose line from the old firefighting effort. Her flashlight fell, its beam spinning wildly over the ground. When she picked it up again, the light caught something metallic glinting beneath the ash. She knelt and brushed it clean. It was a badge, half melted, but she could still read the engraved name. Daniel Reeves. Tears welled up instantly. Her brother's. Her shaking fingers clutched the badge as she whispered his name again. "Daniel, please." That's when the sound returned. Not a whisper now, but a chorus of faint, overlapping voices. They rose and fell like wind, carrying her name, over and over, in a distorted echo. She turned toward the trees, every instinct screaming to run, but her legs wouldn't obey. The air grew hot, suffocating. The forest began to glow, each trunk burning from within like veins of molten rock. From the center of the clearing, a shape began to form, black smoke coiling upward, twisting into something vaguely human. It towered above her, body flickering between shadow and flame. The smell of burned flesh filled the air, and when the shape finally solidified, she saw the outline of a fireman's helmet, melted to the skull. Clara's voice broke. "Daniel!" The figure tilted its head slowly. She saw his face, or what was left of it. His skin shimmered like cooled ash, cracked and glowing from beneath. When he opened his mouth, no words came, only the low crackle of burning embers. His eyes, though, were unmistakably his, brown and gentle, just like she remembered. "I tried to find you," she sobbed, stepping closer despite the heat. The air burned her skin, but she didn't care. "I tried." A sudden flash erupted behind him. The other trees ignited in a chain reaction, their glow flaring bright, forming a perfect circle around the clearing. From within that circle, figures began to emerge, dozens of them, dressed in half-burned firefighting gear, their movements stiff and synchronized. Their eyes glowed faintly through cracked visors. They surrounded her silently. Each one lifted a hand, palm out, toward her chest. The heat intensified until her vision blurred. She dropped to her knees, the badge slipping from her grasp and landing in the ash with a hiss. The air around her shimmered, folding inward like the moment before a flame consumes oxygen. Then Daniel stepped closer. His voice finally came, Not a sound made with lungs, but with fire itself. We didn't die, Clara. We stayed. The fire never ended. She shook her head violently. That's not possible. The forest remembers what burns it, he said, voice low and cracking like timber. It keeps us so it won't burn again. Her tears sizzled against her cheeks. The circle of glowing figures tightened. The light grew unbearably bright. Daniel reached out, hand trembling, his touch hovering inches from hers. You shouldn't have come here. She reached for him anyway. The moment their fingers touched, everything went white. When the volunteer team returned the next morning, they found Clara's camera melted into the ground near the center of the burn zone. The footage was corrupted, but one fragment survived. It showed her walking through the charred clearing, speaking softly to herself. The air shimmered behind her, faint orange lights pulsing within the trees. Then the feed cut out, replaced by static. In the final frame, her reflection appeared in the lens for a split second. Eyes glowing faintly orange, ash drifting from her hair. Now, when people camp near that forest, some say they hear whispers carried by the wind, voices calling names through the smoke. Others have claimed to see faint orange lights moving between the trees, like fireflies that never fade. And sometimes, if the air is still enough, you can hear it, the crackle of something still burning beneath the soil. The hospital had been closed for nearly a decade, but its shell still loomed over the small town like a ghost that refused to rest. Locals avoided it after sunset, swearing they could still hear the sound of wheelchairs squeaking through the halls and the faint, echoing buzz of intercom announcements that hadn't worked since 2015. Officially, the St. Elora Psychiatric Institute had been shut down after budget cuts and a scandal involving missing patients, but unofficially, everyone knew there was something far darker buried in its history. A YouTuber named Ryan wanted to uncover it. He ran a small urban exploration channel, mostly forgotten amusement parks, storm drains, and abandoned malls. Nothing ever truly dangerous. But the moment he saw photos of St. Elora online, something about it pulled him in. Maybe it was the symmetry of its architecture, or the haunting stories of doctors experimenting on patients in the underground ward that was never part of the official blueprints. Whatever it was, he knew it would make for the perfect Halloween special. He arrived just before midnight with 2 cameras, a flashlight, and his drone. The night air was heavy with mist, muffling every sound except the occasional flutter of a crow's wings overhead. The building stood at the top of a hill, its windows boarded, its sign half missing. The letters that remained spelled "Ora Pesy Iatric." The main doors creaked open easier than expected. The interior was soaked in decay. Peeling wallpaper, puddles reflecting the weak beam of his flashlight, rusted hospital beds left in crooked rows. Dust hung thick like smoke. He whispered into his camera, narrating in his usual calm tone, trying to sound braver than he felt. All right, guys, this is it. St. Elora Psychiatric. They say this place still has working power, even though it's been abandoned for years. I don't believe in ghosts, but yeah, this place is giving me chills already. His words echoed faintly through the corridor, overlapping themselves in a strange, delayed whisper. He frowned. That shouldn't happen in such a closed space. He turned around. Empty. Just the long, dark hallway stretching into nothing. He pressed forward, passing rusted gurneys, broken 4 poles, and a child's crayon drawing taped to the wall. Faded stick figures under a bright sun. The words written beneath in shaky handwriting read, "Don't let the doctor take you." His laugh came out uneasy. Classic creepy kid stuff, he muttered, though his pulse was starting to climb. He decided to head toward the basement, the one area that wasn't on any of the hospital's blueprints. Other explorers had mentioned it online, but no one had ever shown clear footage. The entrance was hidden behind an old laundry chute door, just wide enough to squeeze through. The air changed immediately, colder, thicker. He felt it cling to his skin, damp and almost alive. His flashlight flickered as he descended the narrow staircase, concrete walls closing in tighter with each step. By the time he reached the bottom, his camera had already glitched twice. The corridor below was lined with reinforced doors, each one with a small square window covered in grime. His light swept over faint writing scratched into the metal. Numbers, initials, short phrases like, "Stay quiet," and "They watch." He aimed his camera toward one of the doors. "You see this? It's like some kind of holding cell." He tried the handle. Locked. He moved to the next one, also locked. Then the third. This one gave a little. He pushed harder. Creaked open an inch, then stopped suddenly, like something was blocking it from the other side. He leaned in to get a better look through the small window and froze. Inside, the beam of his light caught a shape. It wasn't dust or shadow. It was a person. Pale, thin, sitting perfectly still in the corner. Their head was tilted downward, hair falling over their face. He blinked, convinced it was a mannequin, maybe a prop left behind. But then the head moved, slowly lifting, revealing empty, hollow sockets where eyes should have been. Ryan stumbled back, dropping his flashlight. The beam spun wildly across the ceiling, catching glimpses of rusty hooks, medical restraints, and something scrawled across the wall in black. "They never left." He scrambled for the light, fumbling to grab his camera. The air filled with a low humming sound, like an electrical current. Then, faintly, the old intercom crackled to life. A woman's voice whispered through the static, soft but clear. Code red in the lower ward. "Contain the subjects." Ryan's breath hitched. The sound shouldn't be possible. There was no power. He pointed his camera toward the ceiling speakers. What the hell? The corridor lights flickered on. Dim, yellowish, but unmistakably powered. The hum of fluorescent bulbs filled the silence. And then he heard it, the sound of footsteps, coming from behind one of the sealed doors. Slow, dragging, rhythmic. He ran back toward the stairs, but the door he came through had vanished. In its place was another metal door, identical to the others, sealed tight. His flashlight flickered again, then died completely. Only the faint light from the ceiling remained, swaying slightly like it was breathing. Then came the voices, not one but dozens, whispering his name. "Ryan, stay with us." His breathing turned ragged. "Who's there?" he shouted, slamming his hand against the door. It didn't budge. The voices grew louder, some crying, some laughing, others chanting something he couldn't make out. He pressed his ear to the wall and felt vibrations. Faint thumps, as if hands were pounding from the other side. Suddenly, every door in the corridor began to rattle violently. Metal screamed as the locks twisted and snapped. The lights dimmed until only one remained flickering above him. And then silence. He turned slowly, camera still running. The hallway stretched long and empty again. He started backing away, whispering into his mic, "I'm done. I'm getting out." Then, a figure stepped into the light at the far end of the hall. A tall man in a blood-stained lab coat, face obscured by a surgical mask, head tilted unnaturally to one side. His gloved hands were dripping black fluid that spattered onto the floor. "Patient has returned," the man said in a flat, mechanical tone. "Prepare for readmission." Ryan screamed and ran toward the opposite end, but every hallway twisted into another, looping endlessly. His camera showed him turning the same corner over and over until finally, he stumbled into a large circular chamber lined with hospital beds. On each one lay a figure, covered with sheets. The air was freezing, reeking of antiseptic and rot. One of the sheets moved, then another. He backed away, whispering, "No, no, no." But the camera caught everything. Dozens of pale arms pushed upward beneath the sheets, followed by muffled groans. The sound built into a horrific, unified cry, a distorted mix of agony and laughter that rose until it pierced through the mic. The footage ended abruptly there. 2 days later, police found Ryan's van parked outside the St. Elora Institute gates. Engine still running, driver's door wide open. Inside, his laptop was recording a live feed, just static and faint background audio. In the noise, if you listened closely, a voice could be heard repeating one phrase over and over. "Patient readmitted. Experiment resumed." When local authorities entered the hospital to investigate, they found no sign of him. But the strange part came later, when another explorer recovered his lost camera from the basement. The video was mostly corrupted, but the final few seconds were still intact. It showed a close-up of Ryan's face, staring into the lens. His skin was pale, veins dark beneath the surface, and when he spoke, his voice was calm, too calm. "I finally understand," he whispered. "The patients never left because we're all still here." The screen went black, and for one frame before the video cut out completely, you could see something faintly reflected in his eyes. Rows of figures standing behind him, each one wearing the same surgical mask, watching in perfect stillness. The storm had been raging for hours, beating the forest into a blur of wind and shadow. Trees bent beneath the fury of the wind, their roots groaning in the soaked earth. The moon was gone, swallowed by the thick clouds, and the only light came from lightning that split the sky in violent flashes, revealing the forest in fragments. Between each strike, the darkness closed again like a living thing. It was in that endless dark that Mia found herself, alone, drenched, and running. She didn't remember when she started running, only that something had been following her. Not footsteps, not breathing, just movement, a feeling that the woods were no longer woods, but something alive that wanted her there. Her flashlight had died 20 minutes ago, leaving her with nothing but instinct and panic to guide her. Every branch that snapped sounded closer than the last. Every whisper of the wind carried her name. "Mia!" The voice came soft, deep, and wrong. It wasn't calling from behind her anymore. It came from ahead, as if the forest itself had learned how to speak. She froze, trembling, the rain dripping from her hair, her lungs aching. "Who's there?" she shouted, though her voice cracked halfway through. The reply came as another whisper, this time from her left. Closer, smoother, almost inside her ear. "Don't you remember me?" Lightning flashed again, and for an instant, she saw it. A figure standing between the trees. Tall, thin, impossibly still. Its face was pale, but its eyes were two empty sockets, bleeding shadows that seemed to crawl down its body. When the light faded, it was gone. Mia stumbled backward, nearly slipping in the mud. The storm howled louder, swallowing her screams. She turned and ran, her shoes sinking deep into the wet ground. Her breaths came in short, ragged bursts. Branches clawed at her clothes, slicing her skin as she pushed through. Somewhere in the distance, she saw a flicker of orange light. A campfire. Maybe hope. She ran toward it, calling out, "Help, please." The sound of her voice broke against the wind, but the light grew brighter. She broke through the tree line and stopped dead. The fire burned in a perfect circle of stones, untouched by the rain, steady as if protected. Around it sat 9 wooden chairs, each one empty, facing the flames. And on each chair, carved deep into the wood, was a name. She stepped closer, her heart pounding. The first one read Eli Parker. The second, Nadia Frost. The third, Ryan Kells. Names she recognized from the stories she'd heard. Names of the people who'd vanished in these woods over the years. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "No, this can't be real." The wind died completely. The forest went silent. The storm, for the first time, seemed to stop breathing. Then, behind her, a branch snapped. Mia turned slowly. Every muscle in her body screamed to run, but her legs wouldn't move. The trees were closer now, so close they seemed to have shifted, closing in like ribs around her. The shadows between them thickened, forming shapes, faces, figures, the missing ones. Their eyes glowed faintly with the reflection of the fire. Their mouths moved in perfect unison, whispering the same words. "It never ends. The forest remembers." She stumbled backward into one of the chairs. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the air. The flames changed color, flickering from orange to a deep, unnatural blue. The faces in the dark came closer, their features melting, reforming, merging into one endless shadow. Mia screamed and turned to run, but her legs didn't respond. She looked down and saw the roots, thin, black vines slithering from the soil, wrapping around her ankles. They pulsed like veins, tightening with each beat of her heart. She clawed at them, crying out, but they only pulled harder, dragging her closer to the circle. The whispering turned into a chant now, rhythmic, growing louder until it drowned out the thunder. Her body trembled as the firelight began to rise higher, swirling upward like a column. Shapes formed in the flames. Faces again, but not human anymore. Elongated, twisted, hollow. Then came the voice. The same one she'd heard in the woods, now booming, heavy, vibrating in her skull. You listened. You came. You saw. The roots climbed higher, wrapping around her waist, her arms, her throat. Her screams turned into a choked gasp. Her fingernails scraped against the dirt, tearing until her hands bled. The firelight reflected in her eyes as the voice continued, low and endless. You belong to the forest now. And then silence. When dawn broke, the storm had passed. The forest looked calm, reborn. The only sign of anything unusual was the faint circle of ash where the fire had been. In the center of that circle sat 10 chairs. The newest one, freshly carved, bore the name Mia Hall. A week later, hikers found her camera deep in the woods. It was water-damaged but mostly intact. The final minute of footage showed her running through the forest, crying, before she dropped the camera. The last few seconds were blurry, but one frame, one single perfect frame, showed her turning towards something unseen, her mouth open in shock, eyes reflecting blue fire. And behind her, visible only in that flicker of lightning, were dozens of figures standing between the trees. Some were smiling, some were weeping, but all of them were facing the camera, watching. As the video ended, the final image froze on the firelight, fading into black, and faintly, just before the tape cut off, a whisper crawled through the static. Welcome home.